Hey everyone, Temporal here, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Usually I cover compositions, things like that, how to play them, what to do with them, etc. And I place a very high premium on delivering accurate information. I am very confident in what I deliver because I want it to be a high quality product. This time though, little different. I'm going to go into, based on a first pass of the patch notes, where I think the meta could take us. I have not scrimmed these on the PTR yet. I'm literally doing this video same day that those came out. Haven't had any chance to scrim them yet. Probably won't for a couple days still, as I have other obligations. But just a hypothesis that hasn't yet been tested of where they'd go because I think it's fun. So if we take a look at the patch notes, we see four major things happened. The first thing is a general update. It impacts armor across the board for all heroes that have it, or all heroes that can get it, which is, hint, all of them, because Briggs exists. And that is it changes the damage reduction from armor from -5 to -3. Now, I think most of you probably know how the armor mechanic works, so I'm not heavily going to get into it here. But that basically means that our low damage, high rate of fire, or high spread weapons now are going to be a bit more effective. So that's your soldier damage, that's your tracer headshots, that's your sombra damage, reaper damage, those kinds of things. Next change we have is another one impacting armor. This one is rally, has a maximum duration of 30 seconds. So that means 30 seconds after armor has been applied, it falls off when we're talking about rally. That is absolutely huge, and it's about time. Then we move on to Defense Matrix, which had its cooldown increased from 1 second to 2 seconds. That means after a diva toggles on her matrix, then toggles it off, she now has to wait a full 2 seconds before she can toggle it on again. That pretty much destroys her ability to precisely deny damage. Instead, it's going to be a lot more, hey, you're just going to drain your whole matrix when you activate it. Still useful for diving bastions, for denying missile barrages, not so useful for trying to catch grabs, for trying to deny pulse bombs, annonades, sleep darts, those kinds of things. Trying to block out specific fair rockets, again, not really going to work out well for you. And then finally, we have Reaper. He had his lifesteal increased from 30% to 50%. I don't think that's as big a deal as I suspect many people do, but it's something. So, taking a look at this, global armor change, that's obviously a big hit for Goats, as Goats had lots of tanks. Tanks have armor. Goats also had Briggs. Briggs has armor. So that's going to hurt Goats a little bit. Then when we move on from there, we've got Rally. Rally was a big part of Goats. It's part of what made Goats sustain so darn well. It's a big part of what made heroes like Tracer unplayable into Goats. Same thing with Soldier, etc. With that gone, that's definitely going to hurt Goats. Next up, we've got Diva. And the defense matrix change there is probably bigger, to be quite frank. The defense matrix change just makes Diva not particularly viable for doing things like reliably blocking out Pharah spam, Junkrat spam, Hanzo arrows, etc. And that really makes Goats something that can be taken down. I expect Pharmacy Tracer will probably, after this patch, be effective at taking down Goats. If it's not, triple DPS dives most certainly will be. This is the end of Goat's dominance. That's not to say it'll be completely unplayable, though it might be, but I would very much expect that with this Diva nerf and this Rally nerf and this global armor change, that's probably going to be, okay, Goats is not something you have to be prepared to deal with every single map anymore. Then we have Reaper, and that just honestly looks to me like Blizzard just making doubly sure that they've made sure that Goats is not going to be all that gets played in Overwatch League Stage 1. And sure, it helps. You can run Reaper at Goats. That's fine. I don't actually think it was necessary to end Goats' dominance, though. So where do I think we're moving from here? Well, if we look at the totality of these buffs, nerfs, changes, however we want to think about them, if we take away Goats, if we go, hey, Goats is no longer meta defining, the natural place that we go to is Dive. Okay, that's reasonable. From Goats to Dive. And then we kind of look at this and say, okay, well, we've also seen this big Diva nerf. And What took us away from triple DPS dive in the first place was actually players realizing and teams realizing that, hey, Soldier Tracer Genji loses to Soldier Tracer Diva. What happens there is the Soldier can get enough poke value with Diva's Matrix in play that the other team can't get, that it ends up being dominant. Triple DPS dive eventually fell as teams realized, hey, Diva's actually really valuable. Well, Diva's value goes down pretty hard here. I really do think her value goes down hard enough to not justify running her when she can't reliably do things like make grabs hard, deny pulse bombs. I really just don't think she has enough value with this change. I think she really is going to be relegated to, hey, you guys went Bastion, so we're going to pull out a Diva to dive you status. So if that's the case, if Diva's no longer holding triple DPS dive in check, that brings us back to 3 DPS dive. And that's actually what I am predicting is the most likely result. I think we're looking at a setup where we expect to see one main tank, and that makes sense. Even though Diva got nerfed, you're still going to have to run a main tank. You'd like to run Hammond because Hammond freelances better than Winston, so that makes a lot of sense. Great, let's go ahead and run Hammond. The problem is Sombra still exists, and I also expect Sombra to be run. And if Sombra is going to be run, that just counters Hammond too hard, so you're pushed back over to Winston. That's fine. Winston was the original tank in triple DPS dive. Brings back Tracer. That makes sense. She now does more damage than she used to against tanks if she headshots them at point blank range because of the armor change. That's helpful. She doesn't have to worry about the Briggs Bash combo anymore from the previous patch. The rally won't just stick there forever, so as soon as that goes away, she can find kills, find damage, farm pulse bombs at a rate that's more reasonable. So we should expect Tracer to make a comeback there. Second flanker spot, at least that's how it was in the original 3 DPS dive, and that is what I predict to happen again, because Double Sniper ended up to be not as effective as running Widow Tracer because of what Tracer and Winston could do with vision manipulation to draw attention, distract one or both snipers, ended up being worth more setting up good windows for their sniper to get value. So I expect we're probably, based on that same logic, going to run 2 flankers and a poke DPS, possibly a sniper, instead of 1 flanker and 2 snipers. It's also much harder to peel effectively if you're running 2 poke DPS than it is if you're running 2 flankers. So for second flanker, we've got Sombra or Genji. Some of you might be thinking, oh, it's back to Genji. That's a possibility, but I don't actually think it'll be the way we go, except on super high ground maps. I think it is more likely that we'll end up in a situation where Sombra sees play, and that is simply because EMP is a better ult on its own than Dragon Blade, if you're not going to combo with Nano. And because, and this is the real key, the amount of power that Sombra brings to dive by being able to have infinite information, by being able to have precise, accurate, up-to-date information for her dive so that her divers can dive, trust that information is up to date, and not dive at a place where the opponent was 1-2 seconds ago, is absolutely astonishing. It makes dives so much cleaner, faster, and more powerful. It is huge for setting up dives, and I think that's going to make her the flanker of choice to go with Tracer here. So that brings us into the third DPS slot. We might initially see a fair amount of Pharah just to force goats out, remind other teams, no, you can't run goats, etc., etc. After that, I expect we'll probably move on to Widow or Ashe. Either one of those, very strong one-shot potential, of course. All 3 of those heroes really pretty undiveable, can do a pretty good job of getting away if they don't get dove. Not perfect, of course, but hard to dive, certainly. And any of them would get pocketed well by our Mercy if that was to come into play. Flex support, that's pretty easy. It's going to be Zenyatta. Yes, there is a small possibility that it could be Ana. I would not be absolutely shocked by that. But in general, Discord Orb is really powerful, and particularly in a triple DPS setup, the ability to get a Discord Orb on something and then just delete it is super powerful and stronger than counting on Ana to hit a nade before you kill something. And if she misses that nade, your team now has a vulnerability window while that nade is on cooldown. Then we get to our main support slot. We're looking at something to provide some amount of peel for Zenyatta, help him live a little bit longer while your triple DPS dive does work. If you run Mercy, can also provide some extra value to your pokers. That can be pretty nice. So that would be one option. This is the option I'd lean towards for where I think the meta will go with these changes. The other directions we could think about this going is first what's the closest to goats that could still work? And if we think about it like that, we might start with something that looks a bit like this here, where we've just swapped our Diva for a McCree. The primary attraction of that is you still have a nice anti-dive hero in McCree, and one of the biggest threats to goats with Diva getting nerfed and with Rally having less value is Pharah, her ability to chip them down more effectively when Pharah can't block every other rocket when she wants to, that kind of thing. McCree could make a nice substitute there, could be pretty darn effective, but ultimately this comp is still going to lose to any sort of double poke much more consistently and much more quickly than it did before. So I don't really think this is viable. If we look back at the triple DPS dive comp here that we talked about, you could just swap one of your flankers to a second poke DPS. So get in Hanzo and Ashe to go with the Pharah, something along those lines, and you should still be okay against another type of dive comp. Not fantastic, but okay against them, and very strong against something like this. So I don't really think this has a serious future, but it could. I think what has a better future than this, if people wanted to play in this style, is actually something that looks a little bit more like this guy over here. So what we have here is a thought process of we want to play anti-dive. You're going to have to be incredibly anti-dive to play any sort of death ball or a bunker right now, and you still have some pretty good tools to do that. Briggs, definitely not as effective with the armor nerf and the rally nerf, but still some very good anti-dive properties. McCree, great place right now, definitely an anti-dive hero. And the other hero that got used as his anti-dive partner before Briggs existed was Roadhog. If you were trying to force a death ball in the dive meta, what you ended up doing was combining Roadhog and McCree and saying, okay, well, we almost have enough anti-dive properties to work here. At Briggs, and that really does kind of look like enough anti-dive to work. Now, you do need to make it some sort of stable comp that can play together, so it's going to need an Orisa or a Reinhardt. I don't particularly like running a Reinhardt with less than 3 tanks and less than 3 supports, so if we're going for a 2-2-2 build, Orisa definitely does look more attractive, and I actually think there's some overall pretty good reasons to be running Orisa here. Nice synergy with Roadhog. A comp that looks like this could exist on the point pretty darn well. Have some nice bulk there, etc. Be pretty darn hard to dive. If we move on to our support slots for this, we've of course got Briggs in a support slot. Weird, I know, but that can work if we combine it with really high healing output. So that either means Anna or Moira. Moira plus Briggs plus McCree plus Roadhog. That sounds awful to dive. Anna could be pretty awful too. You have to deal with the nade, the flashbang, the bash, the armor pack, the hook, halt. Overall, very hard to dive something that looks like this. And it's also not going to fare terribly into something like this, which I think is the closest reasonable form of goats anymore. And the reason for that is it is a ton of spam shield pressure. If you've got yourself a Orisa, a Roadhog, a Fan the Hammer bot, that's a lot of shield break. And then for this last slot, if you want to put a DPS in here rather than a third support, I do think that is the more likely move right now. You need to think about your threat list. And the threat to a comp like this just existing on point, particularly when it doesn't have a Lucio for mobility, is going to be another double poke comp, right? Some sort of double poke comp, some sort of dive double poke comp, trying to punish it from high ground since this comp can't so easily contest point because it doesn't have the Diva anymore while also being somewhere. That's really what you're worried about. Well, one of the ways to contest that would be to run your own double poke, and you're definitely not advantaged in that double poke matchup, but the point of it is this comp can exist on point while doing its double poke against, say, a double poke dive comp, and the double poke just needs to check the other double poke to keep them from maximizing their DPS against the Orisa shield. That's kind of what it would be going for. The other option would be, you know what, instead of the Ashe, let's go ahead and run a Symmetra. Symmetra can still deny pokers pretty well by spamming orbs in their direction so that they can't peek as frequently to knock down that Orisa shield.
And you've got the added benefit of, hey, here's a quick teleporter up to high ground that Roadhog can go through and go ahead and threaten a pickoff with, etc. It can at least be scary. You're kind of almost turning him back into Diva by giving him a portal. So something like this is kind of the other thing that I think has some amount of promise. I would lean towards the more triple DPS dive comp as I think the more likely, more effective way to play this out, but if we were looking at something else, Death Belly, it would look like this. I do want to emphasize that once again, this is not my, yes, I 100% guarantee this is what the meta will look like, not even close. I have not scrimmed on this patch yet. What this is just a theory crafting look at is, hey, this patch does some interesting stuff. These look like two promising comps. Let's go test these promising comps in scrims, and we obviously won't know until we see how they do in scrims, and then we'll refine from there whether, hey, they look like garbage, or hey, there's some promise here, maybe let's try adjusting some other playstyles, just a hero or two, etc. That's generally how you want to approach a patch. You don't just theory craft out, oh my god, this is the best comp for sure, let's just grind it. You theory craft out something that looks like it has promise, or a couple things that look like they have promise. You go from there. You adjust them based on what you see, and based on what you see your opponent scrimming against you if they're getting any success. Anyway, guys, that's what I've got. If you have any questions or want to try and theory craft this through some more with me in the comments, I'm happy to do so. Obviously, it's a lot of fun. Otherwise, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Temporal out.